The lantern light swung in Thomas Xander's hand as he descended the rough wooden steps into his root cellar, expecting to find nothing more than preserves and potatoes, but instead discovered a woman crouched between the pickle barrels with desperate eyes and mud-caked boots. Thomas froze on the bottom step, his weathered hand instinctively moving toward the revolver at his hip before stopping midway. The woman flinched at the movement but did not run. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old, with dark auburn hair falling in tangled waves around a dirt-streaked face. Her dress was torn at the hem and shoulder, revealing the simple cotton chemise beneath. Blood had dried on her temple, a rusty brown against pale skin. Her hands trembled where they gripped the edge of a burlap sack, knuckles white with tension. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The lantern cast shifting shadows across the earthen walls of the cellar, illuminating jars of tomatoes and green beans lined up on crude shelves. The smell of damp earth and stored vegetables hung thick in the cool air. Outside, Thomas could hear the wind picking up across his ranch land, carrying the scent of the approaching autumn of 1878 across the Texas plains surrounding Dallas. Thomas studied the woman carefully. Her eyes were the color of creek water in summer, green and brown mixed together, and they watched him with the wariness of a hunted animal. She was thin, too thin, and her breathing came quick and shallow. He noted the way she positioned herself, ready to bolt despite having nowhere to go. There was intelligence in those eyes and fear, but also a stubborn determination that intrigued him despite the strange circumstances. "I will be back," Thomas said finally, his voice low and steady. He did not ask who she was or what she was running from. He did not demand explanations or threaten to fetch the sheriff. He simply turned and climbed back up the stairs, pulling the cellar door closed behind him with a soft thud that echoed in the confined space below. The woman remained frozen in her hiding spot, hardly daring to breathe. She listened to the sound of his boots crossing the floor above her head, the creak of floorboards marking his passage through what she assumed was his kitchen. She had chosen this ranch specifically because it sat far enough from the main road that she might hide undetected, at least for a while. The house itself was modest but well-maintained, a testament to a man who took care of his property. She had watched it for 2 days before finally slipping into the cellar at dawn, desperate and exhausted. Her name was Lydia Ashford, though she had stopped thinking of herself by that name 3 weeks ago when she fled her uncle's house in Fort Worth. The memory of that night still made her stomach turn. Her uncle, who had taken her in after her parents died of fever the previous winter, had decided that her continued residence under his roof required certain considerations. When she refused his advances, he had flown into a rage and struck her hard enough to knock her unconscious. She woke hours later to find him sleeping off his whiskey in his chair, and she had gathered what little she could carry and run. The journey from Fort Worth to Dallas had taken longer than expected. She had traveled mostly at night, hiding during the day, rationing the bread and cheese she had stolen from her uncle's kitchen. When those ran out, she ate what wild berries she could find and drank from streams. She had thought perhaps Dallas might offer opportunities for work, a fresh start where no one knew her. But upon arriving in town, she had seen the wanted posters. Her uncle had reported her as a thief, claiming she had stolen money and jewelry from him. The reward was $50, enough to make anyone take notice. So she had fled Dallas proper and wandered into the surrounding ranch land, looking for somewhere to hide while she figured out her next move. And now this cowboy had found her, and she had no idea what he would do. Upstairs, Thomas moved through his kitchen with practiced efficiency. He stoked the fire in his cast-iron stove and retrieved the pot of stew he had made the previous evening. It was simple fare, beef and potatoes and carrots, seasoned with salt and the wild thyme that grew near the creek. He ladled a generous portion into a bowl, added a thick slice of bread, and poured a cup of water from the pitcher on his table. He arranged everything on a wooden tray, added a spoon and a clean cloth napkin, then carried it all back toward the cellar door. Thomas was 31 years old, though the sun and wind had weathered his face enough that some people guessed him older. He had come to Texas 8 years ago with nothing but his horse and saddle, working various ranches until he had saved enough to buy his own land. The 160 acres he now called home sat about 12 miles southeast of Dallas, far enough from town to offer privacy, but close enough to make supply runs manageable. He ran cattle mostly, about 40 head at present, along with a few horses and chickens. It was not a grand operation, but it was his, and he had built it with his own 2 hands. He had lived alone since purchasing the property. There had been a woman once, back in Oklahoma where he had grown up, but she had married someone else while Thomas was away working. He had learned then that loving someone did not guarantee they would wait for you. Since then, he had focused on his ranch, on building something solid and permanent. He told himself he was content with solitude, that he did not need anyone else. Most days, he even believed it. But something about the woman in his cellar stirred feelings he had thought long buried. Perhaps it was the vulnerability in her eyes, or the courage it must have taken to keep going despite whatever had brought her to hide in a stranger's root cellar. Or perhaps it was simply that he recognized the look of someone who had been hurt and was still fighting to survive. He knew that look. He had seen it in his own mirror often enough in the years after his mother died and his father took to drinking. Thomas opened the cellar door and descended the stairs once more. The woman had not moved from her spot between the pickle barrels. Her eyes tracked his every movement as he approached, widening slightly when she saw the tray in his hands. "I brought supper," he said simply, setting the tray down on top of a sturdy crate about 5 feet from where she crouched. "I will leave you to it. There is a blanket in the corner if you get cold. The door stays unlocked." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him, hoarse and uncertain. "Why?" Thomas paused on the 3rd step, not turning around. "Everyone needs to eat. You do not know me. I could be anyone. I could be dangerous." Now he did turn, meeting her eyes in the flickering lantern light. "Could be," he agreed. "But I figure if you meant harm, you would have done something already rather than hiding down here. And if you are in trouble, well, that is none of my business unless you want to make it so. Either way, you still need to eat." Before she could respond, he climbed the rest of the stairs and closed the door behind him. Lydia stared at the closed door for a long moment, hardly able to believe what had just happened. Slowly, she crept forward toward the tray. The smell of the stew made her stomach clench with hunger. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. When had it been? 2 days ago, she had found some wild onions. Before that, nothing but water for a day and a half. She picked up the bowl with shaking hands and brought it to her lips, drinking the broth before remembering the spoon. The warmth spread through her chest and belly, so delicious she nearly wept. She forced herself to slow down, to use the spoon to make it last. The beef was tender, the potatoes soft and perfectly salted. The bread was fresh, only a day old at most. She ate every bit, soaking up the last of the broth with the bread, and drank the water in long, grateful gulps. When she finished, she sat back against the earthen wall and pulled the blanket around her shoulders. It smelled like soap and sunshine, clean and safe. For the first time in 3 weeks, Lydia felt the tight knot of fear in her chest loosen just slightly. She did not know what the morning would bring, but for tonight, she had food in her belly and a safe place to sleep. Tomorrow she would have to make decisions, but tonight she could rest. Upstairs, Thomas sat at his kitchen table with his own bowl of stew, though he found he had little appetite. His mind kept returning to the woman in his cellar. He should probably report her presence to the sheriff, or at least ask her what trouble she was in. But something held him back. He had seen the way she looked at him, like she expected him to hurt her. Whatever had driven her to hide in a stranger's cellar, it must have been bad. He thought about his own mother, how she had hidden the bruises his father gave her, how she had made excuses and pretended everything was fine until the day she simply did not wake up. The doctor said it was her heart, but Thomas knew better. Sometimes a person could only take so much before something inside them broke. He finished his stew without tasting it, cleaned his bowl and banked the fire for the night. His bedroom was small, just big enough for a bed, a chest of drawers and a chair. He removed his boots and gun belt, hanging the latter on the bedpost within easy reach, and lay down fully clothed. Sleep did not come easily. He kept listening for sounds from below, though he knew the cellar was too far from his room to hear anything. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him, and he drifted into restless dreams of storms and running horses. Morning came cold and clear, the autumn sun painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and pink. Thomas rose with the dawn out of habit, splashing water on his face from the basin on his dresser and pulling on his boots. He had animals to tend and work to do. Life on a ranch did not pause for mysteries or unexpected guests. He fed the chickens first, scattering grain in the yard while they clucked and pecked around his feet. Then he moved to the barn to tend the horses. He had 4 of them, his riding horse Jasper, a sturdy bay gelding, and 3 others he used for ranch work. He gave them each a portion of oats and fresh water, then mucked out their stalls. The familiar routine calmed his mind, the simple physical labor giving his hands something to do while his thoughts wandered. What was he going to do about the woman in his cellar? He could not very well let her stay there indefinitely. But neither could he turn her out without knowing if she would be safe. The practical part of his brain insisted this was not his problem, that he should mind his own business and let her sort out her own troubles. But the part of him that still remembered his mother's sad eyes and his own helpless anger would not let him ignore someone in need. He decided to take her breakfast and see if she would talk to him. If she wanted to leave, he would not stop her. If she wanted to stay, well, they would figure something out. Thomas returned to the house and made coffee, strong and black, and scrambled eggs with some salt pork. He toasted bread over the stove and spread it with butter, arranged everything on the tray, and carried it down to the cellar once more. Lydia was awake, sitting on an overturned crate with the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. She had attempted to clean herself up, he noticed. Her face was no longer streaked with dirt, and she had braided her hair back from her face. The blood on her temple had been washed away, revealing a healing cut about 2 inches long. Her eyes followed him warily as he set the tray down. "Morning," Thomas said. "I brought breakfast." "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice was clearer today, less hoarse. "You have been very kind." Thomas nodded toward the tray. "Eat while it is hot. I have work to do, but I will be around if you need anything." "Wait," she said as he turned to leave. Thomas paused, looking back at her. Lydia took a breath, seeming to gather her courage. "My name is Lydia Ashford. I am from Fort Worth. I am not a thief, but my uncle claims I am. He put up wanted posters. I saw them in Dallas." Thomas studied her for a moment. "What did you really do?" "I refused him," she said simply, meeting his eyes. "He wanted things from me I would not give. When I said no, he became violent. I ran." The explanation was vague enough to be useless, but Thomas understood what she was not saying. His jaw tightened. "I see. I do not expect you to help me," Lydia continued quickly. "I do not expect anything beyond what you have already given, which is more than I deserve to hope for. But I wanted you to know the truth, or at least part of it." Thomas considered this. "The wanted posters. What do they say you stole?" "Money and jewelry, according to what I saw. $50 reward." She laughed bitterly. "I took nothing but the clothes on my back and some food for the journey. Everything else was mine anyway, inherited from my parents. But he is a respected businessman in Fort Worth, and I am nobody. Who would believe me? And the cut on your head, he hit me the night I left. I fell and struck the corner of a table." Thomas felt anger kindle in his chest, cold and sharp. He had never understood men who hurt women. It took a special kind of coward to use strength against someone weaker. "Eat your breakfast," he said finally. "We can talk more later if you want, but you are safe here for now. I will not turn you in." Relief flooded Lydia's face, so profound it made her eyes shine with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Thomas nodded and left her alone. As he climbed the stairs, he tried to sort through his feelings. He believed her story. He had met enough men like her uncle to recognize the pattern. The question was what to do about it. He could not harbor a wanted fugitive indefinitely without consequences. But neither could he send her back to danger. There had to be a third option, something that would keep her safe while clearing her name. He spent the morning working with his cattle, riding the fence line to check for damage and make repairs where needed. Jasper was a good horse, calm and steady, and Thomas let his mind wander while the animal picked his way along the familiar route. By the time he returned to the barn around noon, he had the beginnings of a plan. Thomas made sandwiches for lunch, thick slices of bread with leftover beef, and some of the pickled vegetables from the cellar. He realized he would need to actually retrieve those pickles at some point, which meant Lydia would need to move. He could not very well have her living in his root cellar permanently. The thought sparked an idea, and he turned it over in his mind as he prepared the food. He carried lunch down to the cellar and found Lydia looking through some old books he had stored on one of the shelves. She set them down quickly when he appeared, looking guilty. "Sorry, I was just looking," she said. "No harm in it," Thomas replied, setting down the tray. He hesitated, then asked, "Can you read well?" "Yes," Lydia said. "My mother was a teacher before she married. She taught me letters and numbers, history and geography. I can read and write and do figures." "Good," Thomas said. "I have an idea, but I want to hear what you think first. Come upstairs when you finish eating. I will leave the door open." He left before she could respond, climbing back to the kitchen. He poured himself coffee and sat at the table, waiting. Several minutes passed before he heard her footsteps on the stairs. She emerged from the cellar slowly, cautiously, looking around the kitchen with wide eyes. Thomas watched her take in the space. It was a simple room, but clean and well-ordered. The cast-iron stove dominated one wall, with a counter and dry sink beside it. His table was handmade oak, sturdy and functional, with 4 mismatched chairs. Shelves held his dishes and cooking supplies. A window above the counter looked out over the yard and the rolling grassland beyond. "Sit," Thomas said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Lydia sat gingerly, her hands folded in her lap. In the better light of the kitchen, Thomas could see her more clearly. She was pretty, he realized, though exhaustion and stress had drawn her features tight. Her eyes were her best feature, large and expressive, fringed with dark lashes. Her hands were small but showed signs of hard work, the fingernails broken and the skin roughened. "Here is what I am thinking," Thomas said. "You need a place to stay and a way to earn your keep. I could use help around the ranch. Nothing too hard, just cooking and cleaning, maybe tending the chickens and the garden. In exchange, you get room and board. If anyone asks, you are my cousin from Oklahoma, come to help me run the household. Lydia stared at him. You would let me stay? Here, you cannot live in my cellar, Thomas pointed out, and you cannot keep running forever. Better to hide in plain sight. We are far enough from town that most folks will not see you regular. When we do go to Dallas, you can stay behind, or we can say you are shy around strangers. Your uncle is in Fort Worth, right? That is a good distance away. Chances are slim anyone around here would recognize you from a wanted poster. But if they did, Lydia said slowly, you would be in trouble for harboring me. Maybe, Thomas acknowledged, but I figure that is my risk to take. What do you say? Lydia looked down at her hands, her throat working. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I do not understand why you are being so kind to me. You do not know me. I could be lying about everything. Are you? No, she said firmly, meeting his eyes. I am not lying. Everything I told you is true. Then that is good enough for me, Thomas said. Look, I will be honest. I am not doing this entirely out of charity. I could use the help, and it would be nice to have company around here. It gets lonely sometimes. But I want you to understand that if you stay, you are an employee, nothing more. I will not lay a hand on you or expect anything beyond the work we agree to. You will have your own room, and your privacy will be respected. If you want to leave at any time, for any reason, I will not stop you. Is that clear? Lydia nodded slowly. It is clear, and I accept. I will work hard, I promise. I will earn my keep. I do not doubt it, Thomas said. He stood and gestured toward the hallway leading to the rest of the house. Come on, I will show you where you will sleep. The house was larger than it appeared from outside. Besides the kitchen, there was a small parlor with a fireplace, Thomas's bedroom, and a second smaller bedroom that he used mostly for storage. That was where he led Lydia now, opening the door to reveal a space filled with crates and tools and various odds and ends. It will need clearing out, Thomas said. But there is a bed frame in the barn and a decent mattress wrapped up in canvas. We can have you set up by tonight if we work at it. Lydia looked around the cluttered room, but Thomas could see the hope dawning in her eyes. This would be mine. My own room. Your own room, he confirmed. Now let us get to work. They spent the afternoon clearing the room and carrying things to the barn. Thomas had not realized how much he had accumulated over the years. Some of it was useful and just needed better storage, but much of it was junk he should have thrown out long ago. Lydia worked tirelessly, never complaining even when the work was heavy or dirty. She seemed almost eager, as if the physical labor was a way to prove her worth. By evening, the room was empty and swept clean. Thomas retrieved the bed frame from the barn, and together they assembled it and carried the mattress inside. It was a simple rope frame, but sturdy. Lydia helped him string the ropes properly to support the mattress, her fingers nimble and quick. Thomas found clean sheets and a quilt in his chest, along with a pillow that had belonged to his mother. He had kept her things after she died, unable to part with them even though he rarely looked at them. This should do until we can get you more supplies, Thomas said, handing her the linens. Tomorrow we can see about getting you some proper clothes and whatever else you need. Lydia took the sheets, holding them against her chest. I do not know how to thank you, she said quietly. You have saved my life. You do not need to thank me, Thomas said, suddenly uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. Just do the work and we will call it even. That night, Lydia lay in her new bed and stared at the ceiling, hardly able to believe the turn her fortunes had taken. 24 hours ago, she had been hiding in a dark cellar, terrified and alone. Now she had a room of her own and honest work to do. Thomas Xander was unlike any man she had ever met. He was quiet and self-contained, asking no questions and making no demands. He treated her with a respect that was so foreign to her recent experience that it almost hurt. She thought about her uncle, about the things he had said and tried to do. She thought about her parents, dead and buried in Fort Worth. She thought about the path that had led her here, to this small ranch outside Dallas, to this unexpected kindness. And for the first time in months, she let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, things might work out. Days turned into weeks, and a routine established itself. Lydia rose with the sun and made breakfast while Thomas tended the animals. They ate together, mostly in silence, then went about their separate tasks. Lydia threw herself into the work of maintaining the household. She cleaned the house thoroughly, organized the kitchen, mended Thomas's clothes. She learned to gather eggs from the chickens without getting pecked and to milk the cow Thomas kept for fresh dairy. She worked in the garden, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables and preparing the soil for winter. Thomas watched her work and found himself impressed. She was quick to learn and never shirked even the dirtiest tasks. More than that, she brought a warmth to the house that had been missing. She hummed while she worked, quiet melodies that drifted through the rooms. She rearranged things to be more efficient, adding small touches that made the house feel more like a home. Fresh flowers on the table, curtains in the windows, the smell of baking bread in the afternoons. They talked more as time went on, sharing pieces of their stories. Lydia told him about her childhood in Fort Worth, about her parents and their small but happy home. Her father had been a clerk in a shipping office, her mother a teacher. They had loved each other deeply, and they had loved Lydia. Their deaths had devastated her, and moving in with her uncle had been her only option. She had thought she would be safe with family. She had been wrong. Thomas told her about growing up in Oklahoma, about his mother's gentle hands and his father's alcoholism. He spoke of working on ranches from the time he was 14, saving every penny until he could afford his own land. He told her about his dream of building something lasting, something that would outlive him. "This ranch is everything I have worked for," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "It is not much, but it is mine. Nobody can take it from me." "It is beautiful," Lydia said softly. "You have built something to be proud of." Thomas glanced at her, sitting in the old rocking chair he had brought out for her. She looked healthier now, he noticed. She had gained weight and color had returned to her cheeks. Her hair shone in the golden light, and when she smiled, it transformed her whole face. He felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he had not experienced in years. He looked away quickly, disturbed by the feeling. She was his employee under his protection. He had promised not to take advantage. But increasingly he found his eyes drawn to her, his thoughts drifting to her when he should be focused on work. He noticed the way she laughed, bright and genuine. The way she bit her lip when concentrating. The graceful movement of her hands as she worked. It was dangerous, these feelings. He needed to keep his distance, but distance proved difficult in close quarters. They worked side by side, ate together, spent their evenings sharing the same space. Lydia felt the shift too, though she tried not to acknowledge it. Thomas was handsome in a rugged, weather-worn way. His hands were strong and capable, calloused from hard work. His rare smiles were like sunlight breaking through clouds. He was kind without being soft, protective without being controlling. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she never had before. October arrived with cooler temperatures and brilliant autumn colors. Thomas made a trip to Dallas for supplies, and Lydia stayed behind as planned. He returned with fabric for new dresses, a warm coat for the coming winter, boots that actually fit her feet, and various other necessities. He also brought news. "I asked around casual-like," Thomas said as he unloaded the wagon. Nobody mentioned wanted posters or anyone looking for a woman matching your description. I think your uncle has given up the search, at least around here." Relief washed through Lydia, so intense it made her dizzy. "You think it is safe?" "Safe enough," Thomas said. "But we should still be cautious. Keep the cousin's story if anyone asks." Lydia nodded, helping him carry supplies into the house. Among the packages was one wrapped in brown paper that Thomas handed to her with an uncharacteristic shyness. "I saw this and thought of you," he said gruffly. "It is not much." Lydia unwrapped the package to find a book, leather-bound and beautiful. "The Complete Works of Shakespeare," she read from the cover, her voice awed. "Thomas, this is too much." "You like reading," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Figured you would enjoy it." Lydia looked at the book, then at Thomas, and felt her heart swell with an emotion she was afraid to name. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." Thomas cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Well, you have earned it, working as hard as you do." That night, Lydia lay in bed reading by candlelight, but her mind was not on the words. She thought about Thomas, about his kindness and his strength, about the way he made her feel safe and valued. She thought about how her heart had started beating faster when he was near, how she looked forward to their shared meals and evening conversations. She was falling in love with him, she realized. Perhaps she had been for weeks and was only now admitting it to herself. The realization terrified her. She had sworn she would never depend on a man again, never put herself in a position to be hurt. And yet here she was, her heart pulling her towards someone who might not feel the same way. Thomas had been clear that their arrangement was purely business. He had never indicated he thought of her as anything other than an employee. To hope for more was foolishness. But the heart, she was learning, did not much care about practicality. Winter arrived with cold winds and occasional frost. Thomas spent his days maintaining the ranch, preparing for the harsher weather to come. He repaired fences, checked his cattle regularly, and made sure there was enough hay stored for winter feeding. Lydia kept the house warm and welcoming, cooking hearty meals and keeping the fires burning. They worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs without words. December brought their first real challenge. Thomas returned from checking the northern fence line with news that several head of cattle were missing. "Could be rustlers," he said grimly over supper. "Or they might have wandered off. I will need to ride out tomorrow and search." "I could come with you," Lydia offered. "Help you look." Thomas shook his head. "Too dangerous if it is rustlers. You stay here and keep the house secure." But when morning came and Thomas prepared to leave, Lydia insisted. "Two sets of eyes are better than one, and I can ride." "My father taught me when I was young." Thomas wanted to refuse, but he could see the determination in her face. "Fine," he said reluctantly. "But you stay close to me, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" "Understood," Lydia agreed. They saddled Jasper and one of the other horses, a gentle mare named Daisy, and rode out in the early morning light. The day was cold but clear, their breath misting in the air. Thomas followed tracks leading north toward a rocky area where the creek bent around a stand of cottonwood trees. They found the cattle there, 5 of them, trapped in a small ravine where they had wandered looking for water. It took most of the day to coax them out and drive them back to the main herd, but they managed it without incident. By the time they returned to the ranch house, the sun was setting and both of them were exhausted. "You did good today," Thomas said as they unsaddled the horses. "Thank you for your help." Lydia smiled, tired but pleased. "I told you 2 sets of eyes were better." They stood in the barn as darkness fell around them, the horses munching hay contentedly. Thomas found himself very aware of how close Lydia was standing, how the cold had brought color to her cheeks and made her eyes bright. He wanted to reach out and touch her face to see if her skin was as soft as it looked. The impulse startled him with its intensity. "We should get inside," he said roughly, stepping back. "It is getting cold." Something flickered in Lydia's eyes. Disappointment maybe, but she nodded and followed him to the house. Christmas came quietly. Neither of them had much experience with the holiday. Thomas's mother had died when he was 15, and the Christmases after were grim affairs spent with a drunk father. Lydia's family had celebrated modestly, but those days felt like a lifetime ago. "We should do something," Lydia said a few days before Christmas. "Mark the day somehow." Thomas shrugged, uncomfortable. "If you want." Lydia baked a special dinner, roasting a chicken with vegetables and making a dried apple pie. Thomas rode into the woods and cut a small cedar tree, which Lydia decorated with strings of dried berries and paper ornaments she made herself. It was simple, but it transformed the house into something warm and festive. On Christmas Eve, they sat by the fire after dinner, drinking coffee and watching the flames dance. Snow had begun to fall outside, the first real snow of the season, coating the world in white silence. "I have something for you," Lydia said suddenly, reaching behind her chair. She pulled out a package wrapped in cloth and handed it to Thomas. He unwrapped it carefully to find a shirt she had sewn from fabric she had saved from her dressmaking. It was simple but well made, with even stitches and careful attention to detail. "I noticed your good shirt was getting worn," Lydia said nervously. "I thought you could use a new one." Thomas ran his fingers over the fabric, moved by the gesture. "This is fine work. Thank you." "I have something for you too," he said, standing and moving to the mantel. He took down a small carved wooden box and handed it to her. Lydia opened it to find a delicate silver necklace with a small oval locket. Her breath caught. "Thomas, this is too much." "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "One of the few things of hers I kept. I want you to have it." Lydia looked at him with shining eyes. "I cannot accept this. It should stay in your family." Thomas met her gaze steadily. "It is staying with family. You are family now, Lydia. Maybe not by blood, but in all the ways that matter. You have made this house a home. You have brought light back into my life. I want you to have it." Lydia stood, clutching the box to her chest. They were standing very close now, close enough that Thomas could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her. "Thomas," she whispered, and there was so much emotion in his name that it broke something loose inside him. He cupped her face with one hand, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I know I said this was just business," he said roughly. "I know I promised not to take advantage, but Lydia, somewhere along the way I started to care about you as more than an employee, more than a friend. If you do not feel the same, tell me now and we will go back to how things were. But if there is any chance you might feel the same way, I need to know." "I feel the same way," Lydia said, her voice shaking. "I have felt it for months. I love you, Thomas. I tried not to, but I do." Thomas closed the distance between them and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. Lydia wrapped her arms around his neck, the box still clutched in one hand, and kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the past months. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you too," Thomas said, resting his forehead against hers. "I did not think I would ever say those words to anyone, but I do. I love you, Lydia Ashford." Lydia laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed with emotion. Thomas held her, stroking her hair, feeling like something fundamental had shifted in his world. This woman who had come into his life by accident, hiding in his root cellar, had become essential to him. He could not imagine his days without her anymore. They stood together by the fire for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, while the snow fell softly outside and the future spread before them, uncertain but no longer lonely. The new year of 1879 arrived with a cold snap that froze the creek solid and kept them close to home. Thomas and Lydia settled into their new reality as a couple. They were cautious at first, feeling their way through this new dynamic. Thomas had been alone for so long that he had forgotten how to share his space and his thoughts with someone else. Lydia, wounded by her past experiences, was learning to trust again, to believe that not all men were like her uncle, but love had a way of smoothing rough edges. They learned each other's rhythms and habits. Thomas discovered that Lydia liked her coffee sweet and her mornings quiet. Lydia learned that Thomas thought best while working with his hands, and that his silences were not rejection but contemplation. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their days and their dreams. In February, Thomas brought up the subject they had both been avoiding. "We need to talk about your uncle," he said one evening. "About the wanted posters." Lydia's expression closed down. "What about them?" "You cannot live in fear forever," Thomas said gently. "And I do not want you looking over your shoulder every time we go to town. We need to clear your name." "How?" Lydia asked bitterly. "It is his word against mine, and he is a respected businessman. Who would believe me?" "Maybe more people than you think," Thomas said. "Men like your uncle usually have more than one victim." There might be others who would speak against him if they knew they were not alone. Lydia considered this. "Even if that is true, how would we find them? And what good would it do? He has already reported me to the law." "We start by going to Fort Worth," Thomas said, carefully and quietly. "We talk to people who knew your parents, people who might have known your uncle. We find out what kind of man he really is, and then we decide what to do with that information." "You would do that?" Lydia asked softly. "Risk going to Fort Worth where someone might recognize me?" "I would do anything to keep you safe," Thomas said simply. "And more than that, I want you to be free, really free, not just hiding. You deserve that." Tears spilled down Lydia's cheeks. "I do not deserve you." Thomas pulled her into his arms. "Yes, you do, and I am not letting you go." They spent the next few weeks planning. Thomas made inquiries through contacts he had in Fort Worth, people he had worked with during his years of ranch work. He learned that Lydia's uncle, Gerald Ashford, was indeed a prominent businessman, owner of a successful dry goods store. He was married, a deacon at his church, known for his charitable contributions. On the surface, he was beyond reproach, but Thomas also heard whispers: a maid who had left his employment abruptly, a business partner's daughter who had broken off an engagement mysteriously. Stories that were never quite spoken aloud but hung in the air like smoke. Thomas gathered what information he could, looking for patterns. In March, he made a trip to Fort Worth alone over Lydia's protests. He did not want to risk her being recognized. He spent 3 days in the city, talking to people, asking careful questions. He found the former maid, now working at a boarding house. She was reluctant to talk at first, but when Thomas explained why he was asking, she broke down and told her story. Gerald Ashford had made advances, and when she refused, he dismissed her without references, claiming she had stolen from him. She had been lucky to find any work after that. The business partner's daughter was harder to track down, but Thomas eventually found her living with relatives in a town 20 miles south. Her story was worse. Ashford had courted her with her father's blessing, but behind closed doors, he had been controlling and violent. When she tried to break the engagement, he spread rumors about her character that destroyed her reputation. She had fled town in shame. Thomas gathered signed statements from both women, carefully documented. He also spoke with a lawyer, a young man named Samuel Rivers, who had a reputation for taking on difficult cases. Rivers listened to Thomas's story and reviewed the statements. "This is good evidence," Rivers said, but it is not enough to get the charges against Miss Ashford dropped on its own. We would need to prove that Ashford made false accusations against her with malicious intent. That is a high bar. What if Lydia testified about what he did to her? Thomas asked. That would help, Rivers admitted, but it would also expose her to arrest. The wanted posters are still active. Any law officer who saw her would be obligated to take her into custody. So what do you suggest? Rivers thought for a moment. Let me approach the district attorney. If I can convince him that these charges are false and motivated by personal vendetta, he might agree to drop them in exchange for Ashford withdrawing the complaint. It is not a perfect solution, but it would clear her name without a trial. And if Ashford refuses? Then we go to trial and present all the evidence. It will be ugly and public, but we would have a fighting chance. Thomas left Fort Worth with a plan, if not certainty. He returned to the ranch and explained everything to Lydia. She listened quietly, her face pale. I am scared, she admitted when he finished. What if it does not work? What if they arrest me? Then I will get you out, Thomas said firmly. Whatever it takes. But I think this will work, Lydia. Samuel Rivers is a good lawyer and we have evidence. Your uncle has been getting away with hurting women for too long. It is time someone stopped him. Lydia nodded slowly. All right, let us do it. The next few weeks were agonizing. They waited while Samuel Rivers worked behind the scenes, presenting his case to the district attorney, negotiating. Thomas tried to keep Lydia busy and distracted, but he could see the strain on her. She jumped at every unexpected sound, her sleep disturbed by nightmares. Finally, in late April, a letter arrived. Thomas opened it with shaking hands and read aloud to Lydia. The district attorney has agreed to drop all charges against Lydia Ashford. In exchange, Gerald Ashford has withdrawn his complaint and agreed to pay restitution for damages. Additionally, he has been charged with filing a false police report and is under investigation for other allegations of misconduct. Lydia stared at Thomas, hardly daring to believe it. It is over, Thomas confirmed, pulling her into his arms. You are free, Lydia, really free. She broke down then, crying against his chest while he held her. They were tears of relief and joy and release, all the pent-up fear and tension of the past months pouring out. Thomas held her through it all, his own eyes damp, his heart full. What do we do now? Lydia asked when she could speak again. Thomas pulled back to look at her, his expression serious. Now I think we should get married, if you will have me, that is. Lydia laughed through her tears. That is your proposal. I can do better, Thomas said. He got down on one knee, taking her hand. Lydia Ashford, you came into my life hiding in my root cellar, and somehow you filled all the empty spaces I did not even know I had. You made my house a home and my life worth living. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, Lydia said, dropping to her knees in front of him. Yes, Thomas Xander, I will marry you. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. You saved my life, but more than that, you gave me back my future. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. They kissed then, kneeling on the kitchen floor, both crying and laughing at the same time. It was not elegant or composed, but it was real and honest, like everything between them. They were married 3 weeks later in Dallas, in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Thomas wore the shirt Lydia had made him for Christmas. Lydia wore a new dress in pale blue, with her mother's locket around her neck. The preacher's wife and Samuel Rivers, who had traveled from Fort Worth, served as witnesses. The ceremony was short, the words familiar and profound. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Thomas kissed his bride with a tenderness that made even the stern preacher smile. They signed the marriage register as Thomas and Lydia Xander, making it official in the eyes of the law and God. The wedding breakfast was held at the hotel dining room, a modest affair with good food and better company. Samuel Rivers brought news that Gerald Ashford's reputation was in tatters, that several other women had come forward with their own stories, that his wife had left him and was filing for divorce. Justice, it seemed, had finally caught up with him. "To new beginnings," Samuel toasted, raising his glass. "To love found in unexpected places," the preacher's wife added. Thomas and Lydia smiled at each other and drank, their fingers intertwined under the table. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and Thomas carried Lydia over the threshold despite her laughing protests. That night, they consummated their marriage with a gentle passion that spoke of trust and love and commitment. Thomas was patient and careful, aware of Lydia's past trauma, and she loved him all the more for it. They learned each other's bodies the way they had learned each other's hearts, with attention and care and growing joy. The seasons turned, and their life together settled into a comfortable rhythm. Spring became summer, summer faded to fall. The ranch prospered. Thomas's herd grew, his reputation as a fair and honest rancher spreading. Lydia transformed the house bit by bit, adding touches that made it distinctly theirs. She planted flowers and maintained a large garden. She raised chickens and learned to make butter and cheese. They made friends in Dallas, attending church on Sundays and occasional socials. People accepted their story of Lydia being Thomas's cousin, who had stayed to help and eventually married him. If anyone noticed the timing was a bit unusual, they were polite enough not to mention it. In November, Lydia realized she was pregnant. She waited a few days to be sure, then told Thomas one evening over supper. "I have news," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. Thomas looked up from his plate. "Oh, we are going to have a baby. Next summer, I think." Thomas froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Then a smile spread across his face, so wide and genuine it transformed him. A baby," Lydia confirmed, her own smile matching his. Thomas stood and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "We are having a baby," he said wonderingly. "Lydia, that is wonderful. Are you happy? Are you well?" "I am happy," Lydia said. "I am so happy I could burst, and I am well, just a little tired sometimes." Thomas set her down gently, suddenly treating her like she was made of glass. "You should sit. Should you be sitting? What do you need? What can I do?" Lydia laughed at his concern. "I am pregnant, not an invalid. I am fine, but you could hold me for a while. I like it when you hold me." Thomas wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on top of her head. A baby. Their baby. The concept was almost overwhelming. He thought about his own childhood, about the things his father had done wrong. He promised himself he would do better. His child would know love and safety. His child would never doubt that they were wanted. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Lydia continued her usual activities, though Thomas watched her like a hawk and tried to take over the heavier chores. She found his concern endearing if occasionally excessive. As winter set in and her belly grew, she began preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, converted a corner of their bedroom into a nursery space with a cradle Thomas built from oak. In June of 1880, on a hot summer afternoon with storms brewing on the horizon, Lydia went into labor. Thomas fetched the midwife from Dallas, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered half the babies in the county. She shooed Thomas out of the bedroom and got to work. The labor was long and difficult. Thomas paced the kitchen and parlor, listening to Lydia's cries and feeling helpless. Evening faded to night, and still the baby had not come. Thomas prayed, something he had not done since his mother died, begging whatever power might be listening to keep Lydia safe, Finally, just after midnight, a baby's cry pierced the air. Thomas's knees nearly gave out with relief. Mrs. Henderson emerged a few minutes later, wiping her hands on her apron. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy, and your wife did beautifully. She is tired but well." Thomas rushed past her into the bedroom. Lydia lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. Thomas approached slowly, awed. "Come meet your son," Lydia said softly. Thomas sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked at the baby. He was red-faced and wrinkled, with a tuft of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. As Thomas watched, the baby's eyes opened, revealing dark blue depths that seemed to look right at him. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered. "Lydia, he is perfect. We need to name him," Lydia said. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Thomas knew. "James," he said. "After your father, James Thomas Xander." Tears filled Lydia's eyes. "My father would have loved that. Yes, James." Thomas reached out and touched the baby's tiny hand. James gripped his finger with surprising strength, and Thomas felt something in his chest crack open, a love so fierce and protective it almost hurt. "I will take care of you," he promised his son. "Both of you. I will work hard and provide for you and keep you safe, I promise." "I know you will," Lydia said, reaching up to touch his face. "You are a good man, Thomas Xander, the best man I know." They sat together in the lamplight, the three of them, while the storm broke outside and rain drummed on the roof. It was a beginning, Thomas thought. The beginning of their family, of a future built on love and trust and hard-won happiness. The years that followed were good ones. James grew strong and healthy, a happy child with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn determination. The ranch continued to prosper. Thomas expanded his herd and hired a ranch hand to help with the increased work. Lydia managed the household and raised their son, finding joy in the everyday moments of family life. When James was 3, Lydia became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1883 she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Grace. She had Lydia's auburn hair and Thomas's serious expression, and she was utterly adored by her entire family. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding to changing her. Thomas would sometimes pause in his work and look at his family, hardly able to believe this was his life. The lonely cowboy who had found a woman hiding in his root cellar was now a husband and father, with a home full of love and laughter. He thought about that night, about the decision he had made to help a stranger without asking questions, to bring her supper and offer her safety. It had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Lydia asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. James was 5 now, Sarah 2, both of them chasing fireflies in the dusk. "I was thinking about the night I found you," Thomas admitted. "In the root cellar." Lydia smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I was so scared, I thought you would turn me in or hurt me. I could not believe it when you just brought me food and left me alone." "I saw something in your eyes," Thomas said. "Fear, yes, but also strength. You were terrified but still fighting. I admired that." "I saw something in your eyes too," Lydia said. "Kindness." "I had almost forgotten what that looked like." "I love you," Thomas said, kissing the top of her head. "Then, now, always." "I love you too," Lydia replied. "You saved my life that night, Thomas. You gave me everything I have now, this home, our children, this happiness. I will never forget that." "We saved each other," Thomas corrected. "I was just going through the motions before you came. You gave me a reason to live instead of just existing." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play. The sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the Texas sky in colors that took the breath away. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and night birds called. The world was full of beauty and possibility. James was 7 and Sarah 4 when Lydia surprised them all with news of another pregnancy. This one was unplanned but no less welcome. In early 1885, they welcomed another son whom they named Daniel Joseph. He was a calm baby, content to observe the world with wide, curious eyes. The house felt full now, bursting with the energy of 3 young children. Thomas hired more help, both for the ranch and the household. A young woman from Dallas named Emma came to assist Lydia with the cooking and cleaning and minding the children. Thomas hired 2 ranch hands, bringing the total staff to 3 counting himself. The operation was no longer a small family ranch but a legitimate business, and Thomas took pride in what he had built. But he never forgot where he had started or who had helped him get here. Every year on the anniversary of the night he found Lydia, they celebrated. It was their private holiday, marked with a special dinner and time alone together while Emma watched the children. They would talk about that night, about how scared Lydia had been and how uncertain their future seemed. They marveled at how far they had come and how much their lives had changed. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked one year. "Hiding in that root cellar? Everything that led you here?" Lydia considered the question seriously. "I regret what my uncle did. I regret losing my parents so young. But I do not regret the path that brought me to you. Even the hard parts, the scary parts, they were worth it because they led me here." "I feel the same," Thomas said. "I wish you had not suffered, but I cannot regret the outcome. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." As the years passed, their children grew. James developed a love for horses and ranching, following his father around the property from the time he could walk. Sarah was bright and curious, always asking questions, always reading. Daniel was the peacemaker, gentle and thoughtful, with a gift for understanding people. Thomas and Lydia watched them grow with pride and wonder. They guided their children with firm but loving hands, teaching them the value of hard work and honesty and kindness. They made sure all 3 could read and write and do figures. They told them stories of their parents and grandparents, keeping those memories alive. The ranch continued to thrive. By 1890, Thomas owned 300 acres and ran a herd of over 100 cattle. He had become a respected member of the Dallas ranching community, known for his fair dealing and quality stock. The house had been expanded twice, adding more bedrooms and a proper dining room. It was a far cry from the simple 4-room structure it had been when Lydia first arrived. But for all the changes and growth, some things remained constant. Thomas and Lydia's love for each other never wavered. They still took time each day to talk, to really talk, sharing their thoughts and feelings. They still stole moments alone when they could, walking hand in hand through the fields or sitting together on the porch in the evenings. They had weathered challenges and celebrated triumphs, and through it all, their bond only grew stronger. In the summer of 1892, when James was 15, Sarah 12, and Daniel 7, they held a gathering at the ranch to celebrate Thomas and Lydia's 13th wedding anniversary. Friends and neighbors came from all around, filling the house and yard with laughter and music. There was food and dancing and stories shared under the stars. At one point, Thomas stood and called for quiet. The crowd settled, turning their attention to him. "I want to thank you all for coming," Thomas said. "Lydia and I are grateful for your friendship and support over the years. But I also want to take this moment to say something to my wife." He turned to face Lydia, taking her hands. 13 years ago, you came into my life in the most unexpected way. I found you hiding in my root cellar, scared and hurt, and I made a choice to help you. I had no idea that choice would change everything. You brought light and love into my world, Lydia. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to wake up grateful every morning. You are my partner, my best friend, my love, and I wanted everyone here to know how much you mean to me." Lydia was crying openly now, as were several of the women in the crowd. "Thomas, I love you so much. You gave me back my life and my future. Every day with you is a gift." They kissed to applause and cheers, and someone struck up a fiddle tune. Thomas led Lydia in a dance while their friends and children watched, clapping along to the music. It was a perfect moment, a snapshot of happiness that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The children grew into young adults. James took over more of the ranch responsibilities, showing a natural aptitude for the work. Sarah won a scholarship to a teacher's college in Austin, following in her grandmother's footsteps. Daniel discovered a love for working with wood, crafting beautiful furniture in the barn that people came from miles around to purchase. Thomas and Lydia entered their 50s proud of what they had built and the family they had raised. They were grandparents now, as James had married a sweet young woman named Catherine and given them 2 beautiful granddaughters. The cycle of life continued, and they were grateful to see it. On warm evenings, Thomas and Lydia would still sit on the porch and watch the sunset, just as they had done for decades. They were older now, grayer, with lines etched on their faces by sun and laughter and time. But their love had not dimmed. If anything, it had deepened, matured like fine wine. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Lydia asked one evening. "When you brought me supper." "I said I would leave you alone and the door would stay unlocked," Thomas replied. "Before that, when I asked why you were helping me," Thomas smiled. "I said everyone needs to eat." Such simple words, Lydia mused, but they meant so much. In that moment you showed me that not all people were cruel. That kindness still existed in the world. It gave me hope when I had none. "I am glad I was there that night," Thomas said. "I am glad you chose my root cellar to hide in. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Neither can I," Lydia said, reaching for his hand. "We have been so blessed, Thomas. 3 healthy children, beautiful grandchildren, a successful ranch, good friends, and most importantly, each other. It has been a good life." "The best life," Thomas agreed. "And it all started with a scared young woman hiding in my cellar and a lonely cowboy who brought her supper." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, each remembering that fateful night so many years ago. The girl hiding in the root cellar and the cowboy who asked nothing. The beginning of everything they had become. The foundation of the love that had sustained them through all the years. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across the ranch land that stretched as far as the eye could see. Inside the house, their children and grandchildren were gathered, filling the rooms with warmth and life. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but Thomas and Lydia faced it together, hand in hand, just as they had from that very first night. Years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Thomas and Lydia settled into their golden years with grace and gratitude. The ranch was now primarily managed by James, though Thomas still rose early most mornings to help with whatever needed doing. His body moved slower than it once had, and his joints ached in cold weather, but his spirit remained strong. Sarah had returned from Austin with her teaching degree and opened a small school in Dallas, living in town during the week but coming home on weekends. She had married a doctor, a kind man named William Porter, and they had given Thomas and Lydia 2 more grandchildren to dote on. Daniel continued his woodworking, his pieces now displayed in homes throughout North Texas. He had married as well, to a quiet woman named Rebecca who helped him run his business. The house that had once held just Thomas alone now rang with the voices of children and grandchildren on Sundays and holidays. Lydia presided over these gatherings with joy, cooking massive meals and telling stories to the little ones who gathered at her feet. Thomas would watch her from his chair, marveling that this vibrant, beloved woman had once been a terrified girl hiding in his root cellar. In 1905, they celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them. The celebration would come later with the whole family, but this evening was theirs alone. 26 years, Lydia said, raising her glass. Where has the time gone? I do not know, Thomas admitted. Feels like yesterday you were that young woman in my cellar. But also like you have been beside me forever. I was so young then, Lydia reflected. So scared and alone. I thought my life was over. I never imagined I could be this happy. I am glad you were wrong, Thomas said with a smile. So am I, Lydia agreed. You know, I have been thinking about writing it all down, our story, for the grandchildren so they know where they came from. That is a good idea, Thomas said, though you will have to do the writing. My penmanship is terrible, Lydia laughed. I remember. Some of your letters to suppliers are barely legible. That is why I have you, Thomas said, reaching across the table to take her hand. You make up for all my shortcomings. And you make up for mine, Lydia replied. We balance each other. They finished their dinner and moved to the porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. The stars were brilliant above them, the air crisp and clean. Do you ever think about your uncle? Thomas asked quietly. It was a subject they rarely discussed anymore, the wounds long healed. Sometimes, Lydia admitted. I heard he died a few years back, alone and disgraced. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt sad. He had chances to be better, to do better, and he chose cruelty instead. What a waste of a life. You could have ended up like that, Thomas observed. Bitter and angry. Instead, you chose love and forgiveness. I had help, Lydia said, squeezing his hand. You showed me that not everyone would hurt me, that I could trust again. That made all the difference. They sat together as they had countless times before, watching the night sky and counting their blessings. The ranch spread around them, solid and enduring, a testament to their hard work and dedication. Inside the house, the lamp still burned in the window, a beacon of welcome and home. Time continued its steady march. In 1908, Thomas and Lydia celebrated their 50th year of knowing each other, counting from that night in the root cellar. The family gathered for a grand celebration, with all 3 children, their spouses, and 8 grandchildren in attendance. Emma, who still helped in the house despite her advancing age, had tears in her eyes as she helped prepare the feast. James stood to give a speech. His own children gathered around him. My parents have taught me many things over the years: how to work hard, how to treat people fairly, how to build something that lasts. But the greatest lesson they taught was about love. Real love, the kind that endures through hardship and celebrates triumph. The kind that sees the best in another person and brings it out. We are all here because of their love, and we are all blessed because of it. Sarah spoke next, her voice choked with emotion. When I was little, I used to ask Mama how she and Papa fell in love. She told me that Papa saved her when she needed it most, and that she saved him right back. That is what love is, she said. 2 people making each other better, making each other whole. I have tried to live by that example in my own marriage, and I hope my children will do the same. Daniel, the youngest, added his own tribute. Papa taught me that actions matter more than words. He showed his love for Mama every single day in 1,000 small ways, making her coffee just how she likes it, fixing the things that broke, listening when she needed to talk, supporting her dreams. That is the kind of husband and father I try to be because of what I saw growing up in this house." Thomas and Lydia listened with full hearts, overwhelmed by the love surrounding them. When it was their turn to speak, Thomas struggled to find words adequate to the moment. "We started with nothing," he said finally. "Less than nothing. Lydia was running for her life and I was just existing, going through the motions. But we found each other and we built this." He gestured to encompass not just the house and ranch but the family gathered around them. "This is what matters, not the land or the cattle or the money. This. Family. Love. Legacy. We will not live forever, but this will continue after we are gone. You will carry forward what we built together. That is all I could ever hope for." Lydia added, "You are our greatest accomplishment, all of you. Every one of you carries pieces of us forward into the future. Remember where you came from. Remember that love is always worth fighting for. Remember that kindness matters, that second chances are real, that redemption is possible. Remember and live accordingly." The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and stories. The grandchildren played while the adults talked and laughed. It was a perfect day, a memory that would be treasured by all who were present. As Thomas and Lydia prepared for bed that night, exhausted but happy, they reflected on the day. "Did you ever imagine this?" Lydia asked, sitting at her vanity and brushing out her silver hair. "When you found me in that cellar?" "No," Thomas admitted, watching her from the bed. "I thought maybe I would give you a meal and a place to rest, then you would move on. I never imagined you would stay. That we would fall in love, that we would build all this. Life is strange that way," Lydia said. "The moments that seem insignificant turn out to change everything." "That night changed everything for me," Thomas said. "You changed everything." Lydia set down her brush and came to sit beside him on the bed. Despite the years, despite the gray hair and wrinkles, when Thomas looked at her, he still saw the young woman from the root cellar, frightened but brave, vulnerable but strong. "I love you," he said, as he had said countless times before, but never often enough. "I love you too," Lydia replied, settling into his arms. "Forever and always." They drifted off to sleep in each other's embrace, content and grateful, knowing that whatever time they had left would be spent together, just as it had been since that fateful night so long ago. The final years of their life together were gentle. Thomas and Lydia moved at a slower pace, their days focused on simple pleasures. They tended a small garden together, Lydia choosing the vegetables while Thomas did the heavy digging. They read together in the evenings, taking turns with whatever book had captured their interest. They spent time with their grandchildren, passing on stories and wisdom. Thomas's health began to decline in the winter of 1910. It started with a persistent cough that would not go away, then progressed to weakness and shortness of breath. The doctor came and shook his head gravely. Thomas's heart was failing, worn out after decades of hard labor. There was nothing to be done but make him comfortable. Thomas accepted the news with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout his life. He made arrangements for the ranch, ensuring James would have everything he needed to continue running it successfully. He spoke with each of his children privately, telling them how proud he was, how much he loved them. He held his grandchildren and told them stories about their grandmother, making sure they would remember. But mostly, he spent his remaining time with Lydia. They talked about everything and nothing, holding hands and watching the seasons change outside their window. Spring came, bringing new life to the ranch, and Thomas rallied enough to sit outside in the sunshine with Lydia beside him. "You remember," he said one warm April afternoon, "the first time I kissed you on Christmas Eve?" "Of course I remember," Lydia said, her voice thick with emotion. "You told me you loved me. I thought my heart would burst with happiness." "Mine too," Thomas said. I had never said those words to anyone before. I was terrified. You did not seem terrified, Lydia said with a gentle smile. You seemed sure, like you had always known it would be us. Maybe I did, Thomas mused. Maybe some part of me recognized you that first night, my soul calling to yours. That is very poetic for a crusty old cowboy, Lydia teased, though tears ran down her cheeks. I learned from the best, Thomas replied, touching her face. You taught me about beauty and poetry and love. You made me better than I was. We made each other better, Lydia corrected. That was the deal, remember? We saved each other. Thomas nodded, his breathing labored. I am not afraid, he said. I have had a good life. A better life than I ever imagined possible. You gave me that. I only wish I could have more time with you. We will see each other again, Lydia said firmly. This is not goodbye forever, just goodbye for now. I hope you are right, Thomas said. I cannot imagine eternity without you. They sat together as the sun set, casting golden light across the land Thomas had worked so hard to build, and the family they had created together. The ranch was peaceful, the cattle grazing in distant pastures, the evening birds singing their twilight songs. It was a good place to say goodbye. Thomas died that night in his sleep, with Lydia lying beside him holding his hand. She woke in the early morning darkness to find him gone, his face peaceful, his suffering ended. She did not call out immediately. Instead, she lay there for a while longer, holding him, memorizing the feel of his hand in hers one last time. Thank you, she whispered to him. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for this beautiful life. I will miss you every day until we meet again. The family gathered for the funeral, a simple ceremony at the church in Dallas, followed by burial in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch. Nearly the entire county turned out to pay their respects to Thomas Xander, a man who had lived with integrity and kindness, who had built something lasting and raised his family with love. James gave the eulogy, speaking of his father's work ethic and values, his quiet strength and gentle wisdom. Sarah read a poem she had written about her parents' love story. Daniel crafted a beautiful headstone from oak, carved with Thomas's name and the dates of his life, along with the inscription Lydia had chosen. He gave her supper. She gave him love. Together they built a life. Lydia stood at the graveside supported by her children, her heart broken but not destroyed. She had known this day would come eventually. They had been lucky to have so many years together. Some people never got to experience love like theirs, not even for a moment. She had lived it for decades. For that, she was grateful. The months after Thomas's death were difficult. Lydia had to learn how to be alone again after so many years of partnership. The house felt too quiet without his footsteps, without his voice. She found herself turning to tell him something, only to remember he was gone. The bed felt too large, too empty. But she was not truly alone. Her children visited often, making sure she had everything she needed. The grandchildren came by to cheer her up, filling the house with noise and life. Emma, her longtime helper and friend, was there daily, providing companionship as well as assistance. Lydia spent her days working on the memoir she had started, writing down the story of her life with Thomas. She wanted their grandchildren and great-grandchildren to know where they came from, to understand the love that had created their family. She wrote about hiding in the root cellar, about Thomas bringing her supper without asking questions, about falling in love slowly and surely. She wrote about the challenges they faced and overcame, about building the ranch and raising their children, about all the ordinary moments that had made up their extraordinary life together. Writing it down was healing in its way. It let her spend time with Thomas again in memory, reliving their best moments. Sometimes she cried as she wrote. Sometimes she laughed. But she always felt closer to him when she was working on their story. Lydia lived for 6 more years after Thomas's death, long enough to see 3 of her grandchildren marry and to meet her first great-grandchild, a boy named Thomas James in honor of his great-grandfather. She remained sharp and engaged until the end, still telling stories, still offering wisdom, still loving fiercely. She died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1916, just as the wildflowers were beginning to bloom across the Texas prairie. Her children found her in the morning, lying in the bed she had shared with Thomas, a faint smile on her face. On the nightstand beside the bed was the completed manuscript of her memoir, tied with a ribbon, ready to be passed down through the generations. They buried her beside Thomas on the hill overlooking the ranch, beneath the oak tree Daniel had carved. The headstone matched his with the inscription, "She hid in his cellar. He brought her supper. Together they found forever." The funeral was large, attended by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, by friends and neighbors and people whose lives had been touched by Lydia's kindness. James spoke of his mother's strength and grace, how she had survived terrible things and chosen love anyway. Sarah talked about her mother's wisdom and her gift for making everyone feel valued. Daniel read from the memoir, sharing passages about his parents' love story. As they lowered Lydia's casket into the earth, the sky opened up and a gentle rain began to fall, soft and warm, more blessing than storm. The wildflowers surrounding the grave lifted their faces to the water, drinking it in, continuing the eternal cycle of life and death and renewal. The ranch continued on under James's capable management, eventually passing to his children and then to their children. The memoir Lydia had written was carefully preserved, copied and distributed among the family, each generation reading the story of Thomas and Lydia and marveling at the love that had started it all. The house was maintained and expanded over the decades, but the original structure remained, including the root cellar where a frightened young woman had once hidden, and a lonely cowboy had found her. Future generations of the Xander family would take their children down into that cellar and tell them the story, making sure they understood that everything they had, everything they were, had started there in that dark space beneath the earth. "Your great-great-great-grandmother hid here," they would say. "She was running from something bad and she chose this place to hide. And your great-great-great-grandfather found her, and instead of turning her in or hurting her, he brought her supper. He asked no questions. He just gave her food and left the door unlocked. That simple act of kindness changed everything. It created our family. It created you." And the children would stand in that cellar, smelling the earth and the old wood, trying to imagine what it must have been like to be that scared young woman or that compassionate cowboy. They would think about the choices their ancestors had made, choices that seemed small at the time but echoed through the generations. They would understand that every act of kindness matters, that every moment of courage counts, that love can grow in the most unexpected places. The wildflowers continued to bloom each spring on the hill where Thomas and Lydia rested side by side, their graves tended by their descendants, their love story kept alive in the telling. The ranch house stood solid against the Texas weather, sheltering new generations of Xanders who carried forward the legacy of integrity and compassion their forebears had established. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting and the wind whispered through the grass, people would swear they could see 2 figures on the old porch, sitting close together, holding hands and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Whether it was memory or something more, it brought comfort to know that some loves are truly eternal, transcending even death itself. The root cellar where it all began remained unchanged, a testament to the power of one person's decision to show kindness to a stranger. It reminded everyone who knew the story that we never know when our actions might change someone's life, might set in motion events that will echo through decades and generations. Thomas Xander found a woman hiding in his root cellar and brought her supper without asking questions. Lydia Ashford accepted that kindness and dared to hope again. Together they built a love that lasted a lifetime and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. It was a simple story in many ways, the kind of tale repeated countless times across the frontier in various forms. But it was also extraordinary, proof that love and redemption and second chances are real and worth believing in. And so their story lived on, told and retold, written down and passed forward. A reminder that sometimes the most profound moments in life happen when we choose kindness over indifference, when we open our hearts to unexpected possibilities, when we dare to love despite the risks. Thomas and Lydia's legacy was not just the ranch or the family they created, but the lesson they taught, that everyone deserves compassion, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that the simplest acts of kindness can change the world.